Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 6, Episode 6, Sacrifice of Angels. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a dark Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
Absolutely. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because, as David was attempting to demonstrate there, we like to have a lot of fun with ourselves and doing this show, of course, while we discuss the various bits that we like and the parts that we don't. You can find us and follow us anywhere we happen to do social media, of course. So do so. And if you have anything you want to say about our show, drop us a line. Just remember, be polite, or else we'll just delete you into oblivion. Um, but as always, before we get started and diving into this episode, the last part of this story arc that we've got here in the first part of season six, we of course like to check in. And so, David, how has your week been?
Week's been good. I took a break off from fiction like I do. I do one fiction book, one nonfiction, one fiction, one nonfiction. And so the nonfiction this week I read was The Fall of the FBI. Um, Thomas Baker was a 33-year long agent with the FBI. For example, he was one of the first. He was the first FBI responder to when Reagan got shot back in '81. So he has a long history with the FBI. He critiques most of the book is just him talking about his own personal experiences in the FBI. But then the last third of the book, the third section of the book, is him talking about how recently the FBI has lost a lot of cred with the public and a lot of reputation, and he talks about why.
Okay.
So it was a good book, good little nonfiction book to read. But yeah, next book in the Red Rising series is 800 pages long, which I was telling my roommate, like, if War and Peace was like 12 to 1300 pages, this next book is close to the length of one of the biggest books of all time. It's massive. But looking forward to that book because that series is really good. But yeah, how about you? What's going on with you?
Well, so as you know, we weren't able to do our show at our normal time last night because of me. I had hurt myself recently with the workouts and the progressions and things like that that I've been doing. So I was recuperating from that. I've really been trying to just, stay up on that, make modifications to workouts and diets, things like that. And I'm realizing I'm going to have to do some things a little bit differently. So we'll I'll keep you abreast of all those. But basically, everything else has been going pretty good. Came back from our vacation back to my hometown, have just been kind of revamping and redecorating things here. In fact, if you could see fully into the room here, it's a little bit of a mess. Some old furniture is out, new furniture is in, some decorations, things like that have yet to go up. There's a lot of cleaning to be done as well, but of course, since I was laid up yesterday, I didn't get a lot of that done, which is kind of upsetting me because today just meant that there was a lot of that to do. Because I don't like to have things carry on into the next week. Because obviously you have work and things like that, and I like to have my place organized so that when the work week starts, I can focus on work and not worried about where things need to be placed at home. There's that. We've got some longtime family friends are here and visiting. So we're going to be, meeting up with people and stuff to, hang out and show them the sites here in Texas while they're here. And then gearing my kid up for school, which is the next week. So, these next couple of weeks, this week and then the next 2 weeks, are really kind of busy ones for us right now. And then obviously with school starting, we'll establish a new, routine for everything and settle into a new norm. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to head off a lot of the first of the year chaos that inevitably seems to come no matter how well you plan, but maybe I can have the illusion of control if I, take advantage of this time now and get some of those things done. So that's what I'm trying to do. Like we've made a list for school shopping. We're rearranging her room because now that she's kids entering the fourth grade, so we got to buckle down and be a little bit more serious. That's when school starts to make its transition from, really kind of easy basic stuff and into your more, foundational building of, math and science, and really needing a place to like focus and study and be
Right.
comfortable in when you're home. So
Right.
that's my goal for her this year, and trying to get all that stuff set up too. So it's a lot, but it's, like, oddly enjoyable. I don't know why I find it, so enjoyable. I guess because like, getting to do those things for her and knowing I can do them is what I like. So,
Right.
you know, there's that. And then, of course, there's our show. Here we are in the midst of the 6th season, and, have to admit there's a little voice in the back of my head going, "Oh my god, what are you gonna do in a few forever when, we're in season 7?" But
Yeah.
I'm not worried. We've got so much to cover and so much time, and we're still doing The Expanse, and we've got ground to cover on that that's not in any shows. It's just the books, and we get to do a great deep dive on a lot of that. So hopefully, you all have been following along as well with the books with us, and we can get a lot of enjoyment out of that, of course, as well.
Right.
But we're not here to talk about all those things. We are here to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Again, the 6th episode, Sacrifice of Angels, the end of the mini saga that is the first part of season 6. Great episode. I always try to find something to say, some kind of word or whatever, and there's nothing I can say other than just awesome. There's so many great parts of this episode which really illuminate characters, the world that we're in here with Star Trek and the world building that they do. There's just so much, and I also love this episode because this is another one of those episodes that I've talked to you before about how Paramount and CBS and the powers that be really stopped paying attention to Deep Space Nine, and then with this story arc is kind of when that was swinging back the other way, and they were starting to be like, "Hey, what's going on with this show?" And when they took a look, we're deep in a war, and they're like, "Oh, what's up?" Like, "Oh my God." And it was obviously too late. So this is kind of them, we're discovering this at the same time as them and being like, oh my God, I can't believe you guys did this, but we can't stop it. We can't stop this
Right.
train. So, but we're going to get into a lot of that here as well. But of course, before we do, we like to give a little bit of a recap. Do you want to do it, or do you
Oh,
want?
I know you want to do it. Just do it already.
Of course, I do. Of course, I do. So this episode pretty much picks up right where the last one left off. We know that on the station, Rom has been arrested, and Kira and the rest of the so-called resistance cohorts are pretty much put in the bind because the Dominion has found a way to bring down the minefield, and we know that Cisco knows, and they have gone now from having seemingly an ample amount of time to plan some kind of counteroffensive and get the various alien powers that be together to down to a narrow window. They've got a week, and then in this episode, it's they got to get there in like 3 hours to stop them from taking down this minefield and allowing hordes and hordes of Dominion soldiers to come through the wormhole and really just kind of obliterate things. So this episode starts with Cisco on the Defiant and the attack wing that we had saw massing at the end of the last episode now on their way. We know that it's primarily no, not even primarily, it is just Starfleet forces. The Klingons, while we had sent our envoys of Worf and Martok to Gowron in an attempt to get him to send them some ships, at this point they haven't heard any word from them yet as to whether or not that was going to happen. There's no other involvement. We don't see any Romulans or anybody else. We know it's just the Federation. They've come up with a plan to basically, when they encounter the Dominion forces, which is a combined Dominion, Jem'Hadar soldiers and Cardassian soldiers, their plan is to attack just the Cardassian ships. The hope is that the less experienced, less disciplined Cardassians will become so enraged with the amount of losses that they're suffering that they will break rank and file, and they will create an opening that the Federation can get through. Um, on the station, we have Odo and the Changeling woman have sort of hit a rocky spot in their relationship a bit. After the last episode, we see that Odo's kind of coming out of the, what would you want to call
Stupor.
that? Yeah, stupor, fugue state, something, whatever you want to call that. He's coming out of that a bit, and he's starting to recognize that she has been manipulating him with its experience of the Great Link, and all the things that he has really cared about have, spun out. And he's recognizing that, as she's telling him about the minefield getting ready to come down and all this stuff, that all of his friends, they could potentially be dying soon, and this is deeply concerning to him. Which she's just like, don't worry about it. You're a part of the Great Link. You're a part of us. You don't. That's not your concern anymore. But he really can't shake it. Kira and Jake and Quark are all that's left of our resistance team, because again Rom has been arrested, and knowing that the minefield is going to be coming down, so they decide that they need to carry on with the plan. Rom has convinced Quark to take up his part in this particular plan, but Quark doesn't have the same kind of experience, technical expertise as Rom to do it, and they eventually are trying to come up with something to do when Damar arrests them. Now it's under the guise of, we're taking you for questioning. So he's rounded up the rest of the cohorts. He has Kira, Lita, Jake, and all of them are now in custody. The only one left out there is Quark, because as we all know, Quark is not seen as a threat by the Cardassians or the Dominion, really, at that point.
Mhm.
Um, Deciding that he must do something to act, Quark sneaks up on Zial, of all people, and basically decides to use her as a way to get into the security office and free everyone so they can enact their plan.
Right.
They do this,
Make
they
some
escape.
Hasperat.
Yes, Hasperat's souffle, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Interesting thing that, by the way, I have the Star Trek cookbook. That's not in there, but we'll
Ah.
talk about that later. Anyway, he frees everybody from the cell. They go to the computer core with the plan of sabotaging the weapon so that they can't be fired, so that the minefield can't be brought down. Rom has some difficulty with this, which then they switch over the plan to just take out the power grid, because without power, the weapons can't fire anyway. They are able to do this successfully, however, not before Ducat and company and ops is able to fire the one fatal shot that blows up all of the
Minefield.
remaining mines. Now, with the mines down, the wormhole can be opened, and as they say, I think they said it was something like 2,800 ships, something like that, are just waiting on the other side of the wormhole to come through. um, Cisco and the rest of the Starfleet ships are battling it out pretty significantly. Ducat recognizes the plan that Cisco has and decides to set a trap for him by opening a gap in their lines to allow them to come through, with the hope of closing behind the captain and killing them. But
Mhm.
as this seems like it's about to work at the last minute, the Klingons come in and really lend a much needed hand to our Federation forces.
You don't
Um,
say.
yeah, just at the nick of time, as they say. Enough
Yeah.
Klingon forces show up to help hold the line and keep that gap open. And Cisco and the Defiant are the only ship to make it through, because, of course, they are. And they head straight for Deep Space Nine. They make it just in time to see the bombs, the mines, go up. And instead of attacking the station directly, they go straight to the wormhole. Inside the wormhole, Cisco is prepared to detonate the Defiant and basically shut the wormhole forever, so that none of these ships can come through when he is waylaid, besieged, whatever.
Given a
Um,
vision.
yes, by the prophets, the wormhole aliens, whatever you want to call them, the celestial bodies in there. And they're basically like, we're aware of your plan, and dude, it sucks. We're not going to let you do that. And he's like, oh no, you are going to let me do it, because I'm not going to let all these people come through and kill my friends and ruin, my home and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, no, you just don't get it. See, we say what's going on. And Cisco's like, no, you really don't. I punched Q once, so I get to make the rules. And they decide that he's right. And they say, okay, we'll do this for you, but we'll take care of this enemy for you, but there will be a price to pay for this at some point. We don't know what that price is yet, but they, snap their fingers basically, and all those Dominion ships that were coming through the wormhole disappear. So then when the wormhole opens again and Ducat's all standing there on the ops, and he's like, oh my gosh, here it comes. Here comes all of our forces. Well, they see the Defiant come through, and he's like, don't worry, they must have just turned around when they saw those the Dominion ships, and they're waiting for the wormhole to open, and it doesn't. Nothing happens. So then, of course, the rest of the remaining fleet of Federation ships show up, and they start laying siege to the station. And Damar and Wayun and the founder, they're all like, "We gotta go, we gotta go." But Ducat is utterly just lost, because this was his big defining moment. This was going to be his crowning achievement, taking out, in particular, taking out Cisco, which we'll talk about later. How in this episode he seems acutely fixated on our beloved captain here, and we'll get into all that. Um, but of course, he doesn't get it. They rush to this evacuation. Ducat is concerned with finding his daughter. He eventually tracks her down. He's wanting her to come with him. She's like, nope, I'm not going to do it, because she promised Garrick, of all people, that she would stay. They have a little bit of an argument there. And just before they reach any kind of understanding or anything like that, Damar shoots her, and she dies in her father's arms. And we're just like, Damar, what the fuck? I mean, sorry to say it, but that's kind of how you feel in that moment. It was just heartless. Damar drags away seemingly broken Ducat,
Yeah.
and they leave. Our heroes come back to the station, and we see Garrick mourning over the body of a now dead Zial. Um, that is essentially the
Well,
episode.
and Gold Ducat is in the cell.
So that's right. Gold Ducat does not make it off the side. I forgot to say so. So Damar does try to pull him away, but he knocks Damar away again, utterly lost because of the death of Zial. Um, we see that Ducat is now in a cell, and he just seems quite broken. He gives Cisco his baseball, kind of signifying the true turning over of power of the station, the baseball. Again, something we're going to talk about later on in this episode,
He
because we
says, "I
see
forgive you." I think, right? I forgive you. I forgive
something.
you.
He's
Yeah.
it's the kind of ramblings that you would expect from a kind of, very, he's
He's
snapped.
mentally
He's snapped.
broken. He's snapped.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. But that's essentially the episode. Everybody is back. Worf is back. Quark is
Liam.
so excited to, have his bar back, and Rom's not going to be executed, and all the people are back where they're supposed to be, and we've still got greater implications, because just because they are back does not mean that this war is over.
Mm.
But they've just kind of had their first real major victory on the side of the Federation. But that's essentially it. We are going to talk more in detail about some key moments throughout this episode, but that's kind of it. And again, if you want to know the full details, go and watch it. You can find this and every other episode of all things Trek, except of course for Prodigy, on Paramount Plus. So go watch it and then come back.
Right.
So, with that all being said, I have two questions for you, David, Mr. First time viewer. One, what did you think of this episode? And then two, while you're thinking about that and framing it, your follow-up question will be, what did you think of this overall story arc, this first 6 episodes? Go for it.
Yeah. So first off, I want to quickly mention that I did get a chance to watch that like updated version of the space battle
The
clip
4K
that you sent.
remastered. Okay.
Mhm. And like the new one definitely looks really colorful, looks really pretty and like bright, which is great.
Yeah.
The older original is definitely more of its time, darker palette. But yeah, I part of me was like the battle. It was like really great to see the battle because we have all these ships. Like it felt real and big, and but then part of me was kind of rolling my eyes, like Gul Dukat sees Cisco's ploy, but Cisco sees Ducat's ploy. Like they're both like okay, they're one upping each other back and forth. Like part of me wants like I want some rawness. I want some like what's happening and like oh there's an opening and it not be so quite like basically the audience in order for the audience to understand what's happening. They say what they're gonna do when what's happening and while it does help the audience understand, it takes away from some of the
Yeah.
more visceral elements, which is what it is. I just want to say that this is an example of where the expanse gets the benefit of modern technology.
And
The ex-
of time, and the fact that a lot of people who worked on The Expanse also worked on Deep Space Nine. Put it
yeah, I'm
like that.
sure. Like, I mean, just like the space battles in the expanse are so good. But like an example of that is like we have to break through the Dominion's lines. Well, when you think about it, they're in space. They're not on a 2D plane where like you have two armies walking toward each other and they have lines. No, this is a 3D space. Like you got to think more about that. And so it wouldn't be quite like a line. I don't know. Anyway, I was just laughing when they said those kind of moments because I was like, "You're still thinking in 2D space, bro," or whatever. Whereas in the Expanse, like they don't ever talk like that. It's a fully realized 3D world. Anyway, it's just the benefit of time in space.
Yeah.
And then, for example, like there's kind of the Deus Ex Machina of the founders, or not the founders, the wormhole aliens, the prophets saving the day at the end. But I have to give it to the show because Cisco didn't go there to get saved by them. He was willing to sacrifice himself. They do say that there's going to be a cost to your for us saving you. It wasn't just hey, we showed up. Like they were in the wormhole. That was where the conflict was happening. The wormhole is both a wormhole and the Temple of the Prophets, so it does work in a. It's not like they just went, oh, we're lost. Let's go find some temple of the gods and pray and hope that they save us out of some whim of theirs.
Yeah.
No, that's where that's where the fight was taking place. It's right there. That's the final climactic moment. I am curious to see what that cost is going to be because they basically said like Cisco was saying that the Bajorans they have this religion around you, like you are involved with the Bajorans. It'd be wrong for you to abandon them, and they basically say something to the effect of like you won't be able to settle. I think
Yeah, you will find no peace, basically.
something to that effect, which sounds very like if it's a physical sense, like you won't like in the last episode, I think it was where he says, "I want to build a house on Bajor." Well, if the idea is that he will never be allowed to find his rest on Bajor, he'll have to, for some reason, he'll be exiled in some way to somewhere else. He'll won't be allowed back in Bajoran space. I don't know something. The
Yeah,
Cardassians kidnap him, and
The Cisco is of Bajor, but he will find no rest there.
that's
Is what
what it
they
is.
say.
Okay. Yeah. So it's I mean, we're only on season 6. We still have plenty of time to find out what that would be. Um yeah, so I'm curious what that will be. And part of me was like I was watching that scene like I was like, hey, does this make sense? Because like when we were introduced to the prophets, they're beings outside of time. And so I don't feel like that scene tied in very well to the idea of these beings being outside time. Like they would have had some sense of what this was going on was and how they would respond to it per se. But we also
I can
know that
see that.
they don't interact with Cisco in a we're above you way. When he first met them, they were curious about what it meant to play the game.
Hmm.
Baseball was the game that he introduced them to show them how time progression explains humanity's life or just life as a being in time. And so they don't interact with him by repeating those old questions. So maybe it's not fair for me to say, oh, they didn't ask the same questions over again. Well, of course not. They've moved on. This is a different new conversation. But I guess what I'm getting at is that because we haven't had a ton of interaction with the prophets, but they are supposedly very important. I mean, they're gods. They're important beings. Part of me really wants to dive into that more and get more with them and find out what's going on.
Hmm.
And this episode just gave us a hint. If the show is going to do more with that, that'd be fantastic. I don't know if it would because it usually doesn't focus on that much. If it does every now and then, it's just an episode every once in a while. I think the most recent one of obviously being the one last season where he said, "Don't join the Federation because I have a vision of the future that basically says that'd be bad for
So,
Bayshore," and that turned out to be true. And yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm kind of rambling. You
no,
want to say
that's
something?
fine. I mean, I enjoy just hearing your take on the prophets because I've thought about them a lot and how they fit in because I feel like there's two aspects of the prophets. There's the aliens themselves that are in there, the beings that, like you said, exist at a time, whether or not you want to call them gods, whatever. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's what they're supposed to be in this universe. So you have them, but then you have these orbs, which to me seem to be like they almost exist apart from the prophets themselves. And all those really do is they give you information. They give you there's not a voice, there's not a particular prophet, for example, associated with any of the orbs. And anytime we ever see the orbs used, it is that they provide a bit of information along a certain path. Like we have the orb of time, the orb of wisdom, the orb of, like they all have a specific name which shows you a very specific aspect of life, and then you use that information to inform your decisions, like Cisco using it and telling Bajor to not sign and to stay out of the Federation.
Right,
Um, that to me did not strike as, again, a prophet per se. Um, Giving them this direct information. Like he didn't go and meet with one who said, "We see in the future that they shouldn't do it because of XYZ thing." I almost take it like, imagine a person from, let's say, 100 years ago gets a hold of a computer, right? And they know what a typewriter is. So seeing a keyboard, they can kind of sort of figure out a couple of things to make it work a little bit, right? But they're going to end up getting access to a whole bunch of information that doesn't totally make sense to them. But they will be able to piece together a few things. And so that's kind of how I took the use of the orbs, was they are advanced technology that people who have experience with technology but not technology on that level gain access to and are piecing together what they've gleaned from that. So
okay,
that kind of helped me to make sense of why the orbs seem to be, why everything that you get from the orb seems to be way more linear than what they get directly from the prophets, because what you're receiving here is just a basic information dump, and then the person assimilating it is putting it into an order that we can understand, versus when they interact directly with the prophets, and none of that stuff ever really seems to make sense.
right,
Not really. And like you said, the prophets themselves seem to be so, they're so above everything else. It's more like they're curious about everything. And
right,
so they kind of have a vague sense of what something should be, but they don't pay attention to time at all. They didn't even know what it was until Cisco came along.
right,
So, he kind of gave them their own rudimentary understanding of it, but it's still not something that they just became suddenly super invested in.
right,
And we see evidence of that a couple of ways. One in particular being when that other guy came through the wormhole claiming to be the emissary, and he was from 300 years in the past.
right,
And when Cisco and whatever his name was, I can't remember what his name was, when they go back to the celestial temple and start asking the prophets which one of us is supposed to be your emissary, the prophets, they say, well, wait a second, you're telling us that you're from the past. Cisco's now just told us that whatever was in the past can't be again in the future. So if what you're, because they base their decision off of what these guys are telling them. If you're saying you're from the past, we'll just send you back to the past. Problem solved. And even
Right.
then, we know that they didn't totally fix it because he goes back to the past and finishes writing a story that for the longest time had been unfinished. And Kira remembered the version of it unfinished, yet Cisco found the completed version in the database. So
Right.
they're not perfect about it because they don't pay attention to it. So
Right.
that was so just kind of
You're
to
talking
me was
about the
showing that
prophets don't pay attention to it.
yeah, they're not yeah, so that would explain why Cisco, like, going to the wormhole and, like, 'cause I know some people made that argument before, the prophets could have solved this problem a long time ago. Yes, if they were truly monitoring things the way that
You and I
we
would.
perceive them right.
Yeah.
We're kind of led to perceive them to be, and yet every time that we really deal actually with the prophets, it's never that. They're always seem to be really kind of aloof and almost unaware of what else
Right.
is going on until Cisco brings it to their attention or
Yeah, it's
whomever comes
actually
into the wormhole
that's
brings it to their
actually a
attention.
great point. The idea really is that Cisco ties them to a specific time, a specific
Yeah,
moment by interacting with them, which allows them to interact with the moment. It's actually maybe the argument for his purpose is that um it's not so much he's an emissary to the Bajorans from the prophets. He's an emissary from humanity and the Bajorans to the prophets. Like the prophets
yeah,
need him more than the other way around, in a
maybe yeah,
sense.
that you know what? That's a great way to I don't think I've ever thought of it that way.
Because I'm a
He's the
genius. I'm just
oh,
the most
shut up.
intelligent person you've ever thought. No, I'm
All
kidding.
right, shutting the podcast down right there. Screw the seventh season. We're
I just
done.
ruined it.
Never
I
mind.
couldn't
Yeah.
take it. I couldn't be humble. I
You
couldn't
just
just be
should have
like,
said thank
oh.
you. You just should have said thank you. Jesus. Ego, man.
uh,
Anyway, but no, that is a great point though. Because I think that we've all thought of it that way. He is the emissary who brought the prophets to the Bajoran people, finally gave them a direct line to their gods. But
right.
in reality, it's the other way around. He
Yeah.
made them because they say they are of Bajor, and even Cisco makes that point in this episode. You say it, but nothing that you do really seems to highlight that at all.
Right.
So yeah, him being kind of like the voice for Bajor and for civilization at large. He just kind of pops up and is like, "Hey, we're still here. Like you're
Right.
existing in your little thing, all happy
Yeah.
cosmic bubble swirling around in lights over here, but we're still here. We're
Right.
still, gonna be influenced." So yeah,
Yeah, as I think about it, I just think like if Kai Wynn knew that the emissary meant that, oh, emissary to the prophets, I mean, she would hijack Cisco so fast because she thinks that he's getting divine revelations that she has
yeah.
to obey. But if it was the other way around, she'd be like, you gotta listen to me.
Which also helps to explain why she is so antagonistic towards him, because she does think that he's getting this divine word from the prophets, and as she's indicated before, like when she was talking about when Kaiopaka was around, and she had been asking Kaiopaka why the prophets didn't speak to her, and so if she was to realize that they don't speak because as far as they're concerned, you're not there, you don't exist, you're not something even close
Worth
to being
talking
on their radar. Right. Someone has to bring you up, which would again explain why, despite all of these Bajorans worshiping them, they've rarely actively interacted with other
about.
Bajorans.
Right.
And in most cases, it was like when they, like that one guy who wanted the Dajars, he flew into the wormhole.
Yeah.
He was sucked in the wormhole by accident. It wasn't an intentional thing. And then it also explains why aliens have more contact with them
The
than the
Bajorans
Bajorans
do.
do. Like
Yeah.
they influenced Grand Nagus Zek when he flew into
That's true.
the wormhole. So it seems like they don't really concern themselves until you come to them and you
Yeah.
do something that makes them aware that
Of
you're there.
you and be interested
Yeah.
in you. Yeah. That's an interesting point too, because if that's the case, we haven't seen anyone from the Gamma Quadrant experience anything similar. At least not yet. We haven't had
Because they
anyone.
because they haven't tried to engage him. Like again, when
Yeah,
Zek went into the wormhole, he went into the wormhole with an orb and he opened the orb in the wormhole.
that's
And
true.
that's what made them interact with him.
Bond to him.
Because
Yeah.
because then Quark did the same thing to get them to change him back. He took the Grand Nagus and the orb back to the wormhole and opened it in there. So
Was
it's
that from like season 2, season 3? I mean, that was a
I
while
think that
ago, right?
was I think that was season 3.
Because I'm just like, as you say it, I'm remembering things, but it's like
Yeah.
hazy and it's like, man, I gotta go rewatch that episode to remember anything that happened. Um, but yeah, no,
Well,
that's just fun to think about as we're talking about it, because again, I was like, this is kind of a Deus Ex Machina moment. They just whisk away the Bajoran fleet, but it's kind of fun to think about. Well, the way they do it is they have some sort of influence over time. So maybe it's not that they whisked it away as much as like they somehow went back in time in a sense and like somehow made it so that the fleet never showed up. But because
or just
like
displace the fleet in time. Maybe the fleet
right,
shows up
but I mean, but
300 years from now.
using the poetry as an example is like it's both here and it's not here. It's completed poetry and it's not completed poetry, which annoyed me in that episode. I was like, that's not how I think time travel should work. I think time is the now is the now is the now is the now, and so if you affect the past, it should ripple forward. But if that's not how it works in, well, at least for the wormhole aliens, for the prophets, they just react differently. Okay, maybe that's a fun idea to work through. Is
Hmm.
they don't mess with time a lot, but when they do it in this kind of almost lazy kind of way where
Yeah,
it's half-hearted. It's not
because
complete.
because for
That's
them
really
they're
fun.
because they're not because they're not affected by it.
Right.
So there's not necessarily ripples in their timeline because they're
Yes.
untouched by it. So it doesn't matter
Yes.
to them if Akoram goes back and completes his story or not, because it has no
Yes.
bearing on what they do.
Right.
Wiping out this Dominion fleet doesn't matter to them because it's not going to have any bearing on what
Right.
what they do.
Right.
So the only time that that they ever really seem to be concerned is when it again directly influences what they've got going on, which seems to be exceedingly rare. You know, so yeah, I think and I think that it also explains why um, their interactions with Cisco go the way that they do, because they've had an acute interest in Cisco ever since he showed up. So then anytime
Right.
he goes through the wormhole, there seems to be some kind of other element that goes along with it for the most part. I mean, he's
Right.
traversed the wormhole multiple times and they don't, he doesn't have a flash of visions every time. But
Right.
it shows that they're watching him, and during particular so they must be watching his timeline. And so whenever there are particular moments when he directly influences the wormhole itself, it's almost like him entering the wormhole during critical points. Suddenly the potential of changing the timeline is greater when he's inside the wormhole during those moments versus when he's making decisions on either side of the wormhole. Because if
Right.
he's in the gamma quadrant and almost close to death, they don't interfere. When he's in the alpha quadrant and almost close to death, they don't interfere. But when he comes into the wormhole and is close to death, now the possibilities open up and they can influence and do more with him there.
Right. Yeah. Interesting
Time,
stuff.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. Yeah.
I like this. I like this a lot. And you know why I like it? Because this is not something that as of yet has really been nailed down anyway. They have not really tried to explain the prophets, and people try, and also people try to explain like time travel and how time streams should work. But to me, it's one of those things that should we'll never get right. There should never be a definitive whatever on those, because there's no way to know how us influencing past events is going to affect any timeline. Like we've talked about the Marvel universe and how they've brought up time streams and stuff. I love the way that they phrase theirs of, yeah, you may like we have one stream of reality, and if you change a moment it branches off, and then
Right.
depending on how far down the branch you go, that now becomes the new stream of reality, and it's harder and harder to go back and all that.
Right.
I really like stuff like that,
Yeah.
that make it seem like even in those moments of trying to reset, restructure, whatever, you can still branch off in a way that is beyond your control.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Those. that was a fun explanation for it. Um, and it was fun too that they mentioned how like what Back to the Future was wrong. fun fun little moment. You can really have fun with time travel stories. Um, so yeah, I like the idea here that if the prophets are beings that, like, let's say they live on like the fifth dimension and they could push things in the fourth dimension, but they don't have to push the thing in a way that we would consider like complete. Like they can turn it in the fourth dimension. Does that make any sense? Like they partially change something. That's basically what we're getting at here. Is they
Mm.
if they partially change something. Anyway, that's probably way too much on just that part of it.
No, again, that's the whole point, man. That's the whole point. These are the conversations. That's what and I would love to hear other people's take on it too. I'm
Yeah.
sure some other people have thought about it a little bit to
Mm.
wonder how it was done beyond just saying, "Oh, what a crappy plot device." Like, I don't want to ever hear that as a reason for stuff. Like, let's try to figure out a reason. What was the thought process going into some of it? It may ultimately boil down to, yes, this was a terrible plot device. We had no way out of it, so we had to, give the proverbial finger snap to get us to wherever. But
Right.
sometimes, like, I feel like with things like this, which is I, one of the more problematic ones, especially when dealing with anything that touches on religion. I feel like sometimes they do it just enough that it allows us to have these kind of conversations without having to worry about the
Mm.
philosophical whatever of it. Um,
Right.
but moving on to other things, because we can
Yeah.
we can probably talk about this forever. Um, I got to talk about the dynamic that is the dynamic duo of Ducat and Wayun. These two in this episode are, I think they're fantastic. We get a couple of scenes with them, with Wayun, for example, listening to um, Ducat give probably his greatest bit of speech that I've really enjoyed, and it was where he is talking about the Bajoran people, and he says, "Take the Bajorans. During the occupation, I took care of them. I looked after them like they were my own children. And now, after all this time, they're so ungrateful. They're so resentful. Like, even on Bajor right now, is there even one
Statue.
statue of me? One statue?" David, I feel I have to tell you the number of times that the statue comment is brought up in various forums and whatever, it's nearly endless. I love it. Like, something will happen and someone will be like, "And did he ever get his statue?" Like, just that little bit to bring you back to this moment, because it's such a great way that he thinks about himself. I
Yes.
mean, he's this terrible, monstrous oppressor, but for some reason he thinks they should have a statue of him. What did you think overall of these scenes? And that was just one. There's another one we'll talk about in a minute. But what did you think overall of Wayun and Ducat here in this episode?
Well, we should just say it right up front. This episode, the most important thing that happens in this episode, it all happens to Ducat. The retaking of the station is Ducat's loss. As you pointed out in your recap, what was supposed to be his triumphant moment. I mean, he was seeing Cisco's play. He responded. He was confident. He was gonna take out the minefield like he promised. He was able to suck up to the changeling woman. He had everything he wanted, and it crumbles all around him until he's this broken, sniveling creature curled up in a ball in a jail cell at the end of the episode. Um, so this is Gold Ducat's episode more than anyone else's.
Yeah.
Cisco gets his place, but it's in terms of what happens to Gold Ducat. That's what's really important. In fact, the real question that will happen from here on out is what happens now to Gold Ducat. He's been around since episode 1, if I remember correctly, right? Like he was there from the very beginning. Was he in
Yes.
episode 1? In
He
the
shows
in
up
the
towards the end of episode one.
right, which was a two-parter. So anyway,
Hmm.
um, yeah. So he's been around for the long time. He's had these ups and downs with his character arc. Is he kind of a reformed ally slash anti-hero, or is he still an antagonist? And this whole 6-part episode has been like, nope, he's an unrepentant, self-absorbed,
Mhm.
egotistical. Where's my statue? These unhelpful, appreciative jerks. And he dies, or he doesn't die, but his daughter dies, defying him in his arms, while everything he worked for crumbles around him. And so
Yeah.
it's great. And so it's fun about all that is it's also the moment where Wei Yun is really, you can tell like their relationship is as strained as it'll ever be, and this is probably the last moment they would ever work together if they ever did work together beyond this. Which makes sense because this would be the moment where if the Federation was crushed, then it is crushed. And is it? I'm trying to remember. I think it was Ducat who pointed out that Earth was the actual jewel that needed to be captured. Is that right?
No.
Was
So
it
in
Wayne?
that was another scene I was going to talk about. It's Wayun who says it because Wayun says that the thing they need to be concerned about is quashing any subsequent rebellion.
That's
He
what it
goes,
was.
the
Yes.
trick to
Yes.
holding it will be because the first site of rebellion he feels like will be Earth. So Earth is where they need to focus their efforts. And yeah, and then he's talking about what it's going to take to hold on to their defeat of the Federation.
Right.
It's going to be a massive undertaking, a lot of ships, a lot of soldiers, all of these kinds of things that are going on. And um, that's when Ducat is adding in there about, oh well, you don't want to just start wiping people out right away. We want to, we got to influence, we got to put our control. And he says probably one of the greatest villainous lines ever. The true victory is making your enemies see they were wrong to oppose you in the first place.
Mm,
Force them to acknowledge your greatness.
mm.
I don't know who wrote that. I don't know what evil genius came up with that line. I don't know if they plucked that out of some monster from human history who said that somewhere and they put it here. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's what they did,
Good point.
But
Yeah.
that was just great. Like and he delivers it with such earnestness and conviction. It's like you can tell
Yes.
he really really believes that. It's
He
just
really does. Yeah.
yeah,
And
God,
this,
that
and
he
this
sold that so well, so
He
well.
does. Yeah. And what's so fun is to think about like if the character has been thinking that the whole time, then even in the moments where he seemed to be kind of at his lowest, his most humble, he was still playing it. Like I'm
It
still ready to shove that knife in your back to prove you shouldn't have betrayed me and
and
opposed
maybe
me.
that's why it worked for Ducat so well because it does. It almost seems to sum up everything that we know about that character up to this point. He has never suffered someone questioning his greatness. And even in this moment, he makes that speech about Cisco. He says, "Take Captain Cisco, an otherwise intelligent man, yet even he will not acknowledge
Mm,
who I am and
yeah.
my greatness." It's like so. It's everything that he does is all about other people's perception of him. He wants people to see him as this great, magnanimous, strong, powerful, imposing leader. The way he puffs himself up with Kira and how he wants her to view him on so many different levels. It's almost like we've watched him try to reinvent himself a lot of times to get Kira's attention, but it ultimately still comes back to that with there. Don't you see how much I've changed? Aren't I a great man? Can't you see now what a
Mhm.
great man I am? And when she rebuffs him every time, he gets angrier and he becomes all the more intent on getting that from her, getting that acknowledgement from her. He's not
Right.
attracted to Kira. He's
No.
attracted to changing the way that she looks at him, just like he
Yes.
is with Cisco. He fixated on it. So yeah, great line delivered excellently. Mark Alemo does a great job here in these scenes and really sells that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a great villain speech, and I'm glad we're talking about it because it really does. I mean, he's been this villain for the whole time, but he's been a great coming and going kind of villain. One that was subtle but still villainous. He wasn't over the top,
hmm
but this is his moment. So he finally does get to go over the top a little bit. He finally does get to give his villain speech right before his final
Mhm.
comeuppance. So yeah, I hope he doesn't go away. I hope he comes back in some capacity, but it
Oh,
feels like, well, I'm just
that
saying, like, it feels like his character arc has now been completed. So if anything does happen with him and beyond this, they'll really have to work for it because I mean
okay.
his daughter's
I
dead and he was on a
I
ball
I
on the
could see
floor.
I could see that. I will just tell you, mild spoiler: we're not done with Ducat.
Okay.
So that's all I'm going to say on that
All right.
subject. Yeah, that's all I'll say. Because there's other things, but we'll get to them so soon. So I don't want to ruin it for you. We're just know we're not done with Ducat.
Okay.
Um, I love Wei Yun here as well because he plays into it so well with Ducat, not in the sense of like fawning over him and being like, "Oh, you are such a magnificent and powerful leader," but more like you're a character study. Like he even tells him, he starts laughing at one point. He's like, "I just find you fascinating." It's
Yeah,
like he's just observing this
that's true.
specimen here,
Yeah, Wei
and
does say that.
he's like, "You certainly love to hear yourself talk." And he's just so
And he goes on,
unaffected,
we
right?
Cardassians do love to hear ourselves talk. And so it's a
Yeah,
failing of ours or something. And I laughed at that moment because I was like, well, if Wei Yun had needed to like say I can see Wei Yun saying the exact same thing. Wei Yun
yeah,
could be like, "Oh, my people are very talkative. Do apologize. I do so love to talk, but that's the failing of my people." So like, it's like the two of them were using the exact same excuse, but Wei Yun is like, "Ah, now you're using my excuse
yeah.
whenever I want to do the same thing."
And then even through the rest of the episode, Wayun is just he's so, unbothered by what else is going on. Like when the Dominion ships disappear and the Defiant comes through the wormhole and the wormhole closes and all that stuff. He's just like, well, time to go. So let's wrap this up. Tell everybody we're rendezvousing back in Cardassian space, and
Yeah,
we're out of here. He's not concerned. He's not anything. He's just I'm ready. Let's head on.
right,
Meanwhile, Ducat is utterly just. I mean, he's just broken. He's devastated, and Wei Yun couldn't care less with this person who's been working side by side with, of course.
right.
We do have the quick nod there when they are departing the station, Wayun and the changeling female, and they're like, "Is Odo coming?" And she's like, "No, but he will." You
Yeah,
know, so it's
just a
kind of
matter of
making
time.
it, yeah, making it all but certain that despite Odo now having yet another change of heart,
Yeah,
that he will still ultimately join them in the Great Link.
yeah.
Yeah,
I You bring that up, and I do want to say, part of me is a little bit whiplash with that because well, I guess the real problem is like they didn't do a great job explaining why in this episode Odo is now not so interested in the Great Link per se. I'm not saying they didn't try and address it. I'm just saying, you know,
I will agree with you. I don't feel like they did a great job of handling that either, but they do give us the reason. And the
yes,
reason is, of course, Kira.
Kira, yeah, yeah,
When Because he was on the fence until the female changeling told him that Kira was scheduled to be executed. When
right.
that
That was her
happened,
biggest
that's when,
blunder.
yeah, if she
Yeah,
had never said that, if she had never told him, or maybe told him after the fact, they could have executed Kira, and he would have been, upset, devastated, or whatever.
right,
But it wouldn't. It probably would have propelled him to go with her. He might not like her, but at this point, he would have had nothing left. Whereas
right,
Kira is his anchor point to
yes,
us.
right,
So knowing that she was still there and fighting, and the potential to lose her above everyone else, is what's spurred him to action.
right. And I should point out that I think the reason is kind of was a little bit. I think the major problem for me was the way they chose to do it. When Odo starts this episode, he's already kind of wobbling. We're at like, was it like just last episode? He had previously been like, "Oh, I don't even care anymore. I'm part of the Great Link now." Blah blah blah. It was like, wait a minute, like it feels like you changed too again
Well,
whiplashy.
we didn't see enough because what we're supposed to be led to think is that he's being influenced by the female changing and the Great Link, but he has a couple of moments where they're not together. And in those few moments when he's not together, he goes and he seeks out Kira. And when we see him next, when he's wobbling, like at the beginning of this episode, it's because the last time he saw Kira, she was very angry and very
Right.
upset with him. And that was supposed to have shaken him a bit because he's been so out of it, he didn't realize all of what was going on and in the full effect that it was having. But then
Right.
by meeting up with Kira again, she kind of, you know, slaps him for all, verbal slap, of course, to be like, yeah, you have completely fallen off. And not only that, but like, I can't forgive you. Like, personally, I can't forgive you. I can't do it. And that's what makes him in the next scene we see him, why he's all introspective and he's down and he's like, all these people are going to die and these are people I care about. And even the changeling calls him out on him. She's like, people you care about are going to die. You mean Kira. You don't
Yeah.
mean other people. You don't care about Cisco and Dax and whomever. Your focus is Kira. And
Right.
she's like, that's why I'm going to, this is not going to be a concern for you for very long. Kira's going to die.
Right.
I'm going to kill her.
Right. Which
And
again is
that's
the
again
greatest
the next part.
blunder.
Yeah.
Yeah. If
If
he
she
if
would have said
she hadn't
something
said that, he
like,
wouldn't have.
yeah,
Sorry. Go
tell
ahead.
you, if
Go
she
ahead.
had
Go
said,
ahead.
well, I was going to say, if she had said something like, tell you what, we're going to leave the station. How about we take Kira with us? When we leave, we'll take Kira.
Mm,
And,
right.
you might not get to see her for a little bit because we got to get to our undisclosed location, but we'll take her with us.
Right.
He probably would have been a little bit more willing to go along with things if
Right.
that was something that was offered.
Right.
She had said something along those lines of, when we win, would you like it if we left Kira here? We'll put Kira
Right.
in control of the station because we have a non-aggression pact with the
Right.
Bajorans. We'll give her the station,
Right.
and you can come and visit her whenever you want. Like, any of those
Yeah.
things would have been
Much
options
more.
they could have explored.
That's actually a great point. I think that's part of the reason why I think the changeling character has been interesting because I feel like if the idea was that Odo was sent out as a baby changeling before he even had sentience, was a self-aware individual, they sent him out like they did many others. They haven't seemed to respond to Odo with okay, tell us what you learned.
Yeah.
It's not a I just can't fully grasp what the I mean, I can't grasp on a story level what the idea was behind it. Now, that might be just frankly a fault on the half of we have writers who are writing for a show and there are lots of them and they have to take the content that came before and move forward with it. And so it's hard to answer questions from stuff that when the seeds were planted long ago. But that's what it comes down to for me is like she doesn't do a very good job of ever truly. I mean, there was that episode. I think it was last episode where we find out that Odo showed her how to engage in intimacy in the solid way. So she is learning some things, but she still treated it as a pet thing. Oh, isn't it cute? Those poor
Mhm.
solids have a very poor version of the Great Link. Um, she doesn't get to know Odo on a tell me why she matters so much to you. What does it mean to have lived amongst them? And you know what I mean? I'm sorry, I'm
No,
rambling.
you're fine. I'm glad that you brought this up because I want to take us back to an episode we did a while back when Odo had his quote unquote first time. Okay.
Sure.
Remember what we talked about? And I was saying how this was their attempt at handling like late stage puberty and development, basically. And Odo was a character because everything we had seen for Odo up to this point was how much he was fixated up to that point of him sleeping with that other woman was how he was fixated on Kira, but he had no experience. So that was kind of the running joke was that Odo had no real relationship experience. Okay. And so now we were getting to a point where, because I think that was like season 4. So now we're getting to a point where we're kind of at the midway run of the show. We know that these two, or at least one of these characters, likes the other one, but there is this sense of Odo is not a man yet. So we have to make a man out of him before he can be with the woman that he loves. Meanwhile, Kira is out here with Barial, then she's with Shakar, and she's got Ducat sniffing around and so forth and so on, right? So there's this thing that it's we got to make a man out of him. We've got to make him worthy of her. And so there's again the notion of in order for that to happen, he's got to hit these kind of highs and low points of relationship development. So of course he has his first time. He's got the woman on the promenade who runs the dress shop or whatever who's interested in Odo. So he's got the flirtation that he doesn't know what to do with. He's got the loss of the love or whatever when Luoxana comes, and Luoxana is someone who he wasn't at first interested in, but then he kind of comes around a little bit and is comfortable with her, and then he has to kind of let that kind of thing go. And then we have the moment where he confesses his feelings and is rejected to a degree, which is the alternate timeline Odo telling Kira why he does what he does is because he's in love with her. And now we have this situation here where he's got this person whom he should have everything, right? They should be the most compatible. All of their stuff should work, but it doesn't because they are fundamentally different inside, right?
Right.
And also because he is still harboring feelings for the one that got away, which is what Kira is now to him in this instant, right? So there's all of this stuff that they force into development for Odo just to get him to a point where he and Kira can be together and for when it happens, if it happens, their relationship to make sense. Because if they had done it too soon, if they had gone straight from him having no experience to only with Kira and being totally devoted to Kira, he would have seemed so ineffective and weak because she was the only person that he had ever been with. And Kira's a very strong character, and it would have been like she was running that show, and they weren't going to do that in 90s television. So now he's had all of these arcs with romance and so forth that now he's at a point where it's him actively choosing Kira, not just being fixated on her, if that makes sense at all.
Okay. Yeah. I guess what does choosing mean at this point? I mean, I know that he and Kira were like, we need to talk about our relationship, but now it's not the time with the occupation and all. So that will be something to talk
Well, so,
about now that things have.
right. But when I'm saying like actively choosing Kira, which is what we see here in this episode, is him
Oh, I see what you mean. Right.
when the changeling is like, oh, well, we're gonna have her killed, and he's like, and that's when he's like, nope, that's why his you know, switching sides again was such a thing because now it was necessary because they felt we were now at a point he had now had his one night stand, his night of meaningless sex, his whatever. We now he had done all of those things, and now the realization was, without all the heavy cliches and Hallmark music, he was now ready for his one true love, which we see him reunite with Kira in the Jeffries tube or whatever. And she's like, "What about the Great Link?" And he's like, "Well, I could tell you, but I think you already know," which is kind of alluding to the point of I had this thing and it was wonderful and whatever else, but there's something else that I want that I feel is even better. I just can't say it just yet
Right.
because obviously stuff's going down.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Anyway,
Yeah.
all this to say, once again, I just feel like there was a lot of unnecessary hoops they made this character jump through to get us to a point where we feel like this will they won't they with Kira is worth it. And I don't feel like this episode gave us enough in that development to make us feel strongly about it yet.
Right.
I almost feel like it wasn't necessary for this episode. I would have been much more impressed if they had done the similar storyline and showing Odo, but giving us more of showing a conflicted Odo.
Right.
him being alarmed that he was out of commission for 3 days, and
Right.
slowly becoming aware of the fact that this changeling is manipulating him and she is not telling him all that's going on, and she's making decisions on his behalf without his input, and him coming to terms with the fact that she's doing those things and being like, this is something I'm definitely not okay with. I need her to stop, you
Right.
know, and that's why he changes, not my love for Kira won't let me let this go on anymore or whatever that was supposed to be.
Okay. All right.
So I guess before we can wrap anything up, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. We have to ask, because that was the second question and you didn't answer it. What did you think overall of this 6-part saga here, opening
Of
storyline?
part of course, the season 6. Um,
Yes.
if I've been seeming distracted the last few minutes, it's because I've been trying to think about what I want to say about that. We've talked about this before, so I'm not repeating. I'm repeating myself. Deep Space Nine has been trying to do something that was a first for Star Trek, obviously.
Hmm.
And I don't mean that other shows didn't. I mean, I haven't seen the original show. I've just seen TNG, but TNG had this only on very limited levels. Because Deep Space Nine is set on a space station, change over time between characters and the setting and the peoples that they interact with is much more of a focus than anything that happened on TNG. We can go from one mission to the next and just bounce around and have fun and monster of the week missions and what's this alien race this time and what's going on in the next 40 minutes. It's solved by the end of 40 minutes. Because Deep Space Nine is it's a hybrid storytelling technique of we're returning at the end of every episode, we're generally returning back to the status quo. We're
Hmm.
on the station, Quark runs a bar, Bashir's the doctor, and they have their quibbles and their infighting and their this and the that's. But amongst all of that has been this growing tide of the Dominion and Bejor and other things going on. And this 6 episodes, whatever, you know what I'm saying, has been a culmination of that storyline coming together. And then we return back to, again, the status quo per se at the end of the episode of episode 6 here. And I'll put it this way. When when Rom was going into the bowels of the station to turn off the weapons array, and he turned it off after they had destroyed the minefield. Part of my brain was like, "Wait a minute, no, that's not right. He's supposed to be successful. He's supposed to save the day at the last moment. You know, the counter is counting down, and this last second he pulls it off and saves the day." But that's just me going along with it. Then I thought about it, especially as the episode continued, and it's like, oh wait, no. True return to status quo is the removal of the minefield and the removal of the Cardassians and the Dominion, and Cisco and the crew getting back on the station. With the minefield removed, that's true status quo being returned to. And so I laughed at myself when I realized that, because that basically was a conflict of the two storytelling elements of, if we're going to return to the status quo, the TNG kind of style of, all right, we're going to fly off to the next mission, then yes, it made sense for the minefield to go down. But on the other hand, and maybe this will happen in the next couple episodes, that minefield needs to go back up ASAP. Like, if the plot is going to keep moving forward, we need the minefield to be there. At least until this Dominion War ends or something to that effect. So again, I don't know what will happen with it, but I think that's a great. What I'm getting at is that because Deep Space Nine, and maybe this is because Paramount and everyone else was kind of ignoring it, as you said, has been allowed to work on this type of storytelling. It is clunky at times. I do feel like there are some clunky elements with um, like, it felt like I said in the last episode, it didn't feel like Kira and the crew on the station had yet reached the climactic point of we've been found out and everything's going badly for us and we needs to be saved. Like, it wasn't climactic for their characters. Now in this episode, they do get locked away in the jail cell because we just need to make sure that they're not a problem. We suspect that they're going to be a problem, but nothing had really ever come too strongly of their choices. They hadn't ever built up this massive resistance cell. They hadn't been sabotaging things left and right. They hadn't proved to be giant thorns in the side to the Dominion. Um, Other things have been happening, especially with Odo. So it's not like things weren't happening, but what I'm getting at is that, like, with shows like The Expanse, which of course is the show we always go back to as our because we love it, and it's a great kind of comparative sci-fi show. That show obviously doesn't return to status quo at the end of each episode. It constantly moves the plot forward, and that's what makes it so exciting and so fun. But then TNG is also fun because it is kind of able to be more casual, and because Deep Space Nine is a trying to hybridize those two elements at times, it does come off as like, I wish that the ramping up of action and plot and moving things forward would really be drastic and really go forward and like let me put it this way: the Dominion has now retreated, but like, what does that mean for the war? Does that mean the war will continue, but now on Deep Space Nine we're just going to have things happen, and then we're going to hear about the Dominion fights, and then maybe at some point we'll have to go do something with the war, or is the war still on? Because the wormhole's still there, as we know. This is what I'm getting at is like, by being this hybrid thing, Deep Space Nine is really having to grapple with how to tell stories that
Yeah.
don't always fit nicely into a 40-minute storytelling angle. That's why
Yes.
we always mention, man, wouldn't it be great if we had more time to tell like a two-parter? Um,
Yes.
wouldn't it be great if this or that? But like, the two parters are most common thing. So for example, I think one thing that I forgot to mention last week and that followed up this week, the Jim Hadar, when it came to locking people up in the jail cell, were useless. I mean, last episode, Quark was talking with Rom, and that one guy was like lurking in the hallway. Like, bro, you don't think it's a problem that they obviously are talking very animatedly about something, that they're upset? Like, this is a saboteur that was caught. What's going on here? And then in this episode, Quark holds two Jim Hadar at gunpoint and kills them real quick. Part of me was just laughing because I was like, the Jim Hadar have been set up as like these super soldiers, but apparently they're not very good guardsmen. Like,
Well,
don't put them up in
yeah,
charge of
they're
prisoners.
I mean, if there's any part of the of all Trek, if there's any part of all Trek and their plots that falls apart, it's when they do things like that. When they set up this enemy to be this incredibly dominant, dangerous force, but then really the truth of the matter is they're only as dominant and dangerous as we need them to be in the moment.
Right.
They go from knowing everything to every trick, they watch every corner, they're behind every door, they're the evil angry menace. They go from that to the sleeping slumped over fat guy who ate too many burritos, behind the desk that
Mm-hmm.
you just can walk past or
Mm-hmm.
lift the keys off of to get through the secret door, or whatever it is. The
Right.
same is true of what they did with the Klingons. They've done it with the Borg. All of the big bads at some point they get reduced down to whatever level is necessary for the plot of what they're doing. When the Borg were first revealed in Star Trek The Next Generation, they were just this implacable, unstoppable enemy. By the time we get around to Voyager, we've got sympathetic, sexy Borg
Yeah.
who make you feel things and you want to deborgify them and stuff. Yeah, just whatever. I
Yeah.
mean,
Uh-huh.
s- and this is nothing to take away from certain characters that come out of that development, because even out of that, they were able to glean some pretty phenomenal characters. And I don't want to spoil that for you in case you end up going and watching Voyager. But the path to get there, to then get those great characters, was crap. Um,
Oh, I just wanted to say, I did when we were here with that. I want to say, while I was thinking about all that, is that Voyager is another show that obviously was jumping headfirst into a, we have to consider what this, like, if we're not just going from monster fights week to week. I mean, I imagine there is a lot of that, but they are trying to achieve a long-term goal
so
moving forward.
so Voyager is a conundrum of a show because of the fact that the show premise or the story is this ship lost for far from home trying to make their way back, and yet
Right.
at the same time, while we're watching their journey from this distant dark corner of the galaxy back home,
Right.
we are also kind of hitting factory reset every week. So the two things don't mesh well, and that is purely a product of the powers that be, the executive producers and controllers at Paramount being like, we absolutely must return to the Kirk, Spock, the Picard, Riker, Data formula of storytelling. We don't want serialization. We want episodic. We so that's why things don't make any sense, and that's why it's really hard to place timelines when it comes to Voyager. Is this episode directly following the one that we watched last week? Has it been weeks since we last saw our crew? Months? What's the situation here? And we would not get regular updates as to how far into their travel they were. During
Right.
certain significant events, they would tell us, oh, this jumped us 400 light years closer, or this thing jumped us 10,000 light years closer, and we are now 40,000 light years from home. And it was like stuff like that, but they never told us,
Time wise, what was going
yeah,
on? Yeah.
yeah. So, and then, and people make fun of it all the time because it'd be like when the show first started, Voyager had 38 torpedoes. Well, within like the first season, they somehow inexplicably fired 127. Where'd those other torpedoes come from, guys? You're not manufacturing the things.
Right.
So, what happened? Like, there's a lot of that. And yeah, it became kind of the smashing of the factory reset every single week, which kind of made other aspects of Voyager suffer, which also, oddly, if you read the books, it made the books better somehow because it was like the books were kind of fitting into these gaps of storytelling, and then the books would explain certain things like
Mm.
them meeting up with certain aliens who were had replication technology that could fabricate what they needed to make torpedoes
Right.
or uranium hull casings or whatever it was. So,
Right.
and it would just be a little throwaway line in the book or whatever, nothing major, but it was enough that if you were really invested, it helped you.
Could take
It
you
helped you,
over.
right?
Yeah.
But if you just watch the show, you didn't get that.
And I have
Um,
to say that there were times when I watched Battlestar Galactica where I was up like, how in the world are they keeping these blasted fighters going after
yeah.
all this
Well,
time?
and even that show, which is as great as that show is, I mean, it had its issues, and that being one of them. And they do their bits to kind of explain here
I
and
mean,
there,
they didn't
you know.
ignore it. They addressed
Yeah,
it. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, they certainly did address it, but they also made a point of making episodes about running out of water, running out of
Yes.
food, running out of fuel. They did those things as well to make a point of we are aware that we are telling a continual serialized story, which is what Voyager should have been, and from my understanding, what they actually campaigned Voyager to be, and
Right.
they were shot down. It's like the again powers that be were like, no, it must be this other thing. So yeah. Um, Real quick, I do want to explain because I just found this out since we've talked about it a couple of times now. You've mentioned the Deus Ex Machina of the prophets here. Um, just so that you know, our head writers and production people on this particular storyline hate it. Absolutely hate it when people call it that because they feel that the development of the Cisco Prophet storyline always kind of led them here. We knew there was something special about their relationship and their interaction, kind of what I was saying earlier, without realizing that's what I was saying, but that there is a significance to Cisco that these moments are supposed to highlight.
Yes.
And it would make sense that in this critical moment where Cisco is once again kind of on this precipice, that they would interfere because they have a particular interest in Cisco that, as of yet, has not been really um, talked about, hard identified, whatever. We're just supposed to pick up on the fact that from day one, these people have taken an interest in Cisco. And they point out, like the wormhole has existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and no one has really been able to confirm it until Cisco comes along.
Right.
Cisco is the key to the wormhole. Cisco is the one that gets all this stuff going. So once again, when Cisco is here, it should be obvious. Of course, they would do what he wants.
And I want to
Uh,
be very clear that I agree with that. I when I said it was a do a mark in the moment or Dukes, I don't know how you say that word. Anyway,
I believe it's
um,
Deus, but go ahead.
oh right, Deus. I don't know why I was calling it Dukes. Deus Ex Machina. Anyway, the reason I brought that up is because it comes off that way at initial viewing. But
Yes.
if you are a regular viewer and you've been paying attention, it is deeper. It does make more sense, and it actually subverts the do a Machina moment. So
And I think you just hit it on the head right there too. How many people actually pay attention? They think that they're paying attention, but they're not.
well, how many people make a
Especially back
podcast
then.
about it too?
Well, right, and especially back then. I mean, again, 30 years ago, we didn't have the ability of binge watching and streaming and whatever else, and having the reminders. I mean, they would do the last time on Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, but it didn't cover the full last time and recap everything that you needed, nor did you
Right.
have a periodic update breakdown to show, what you needed to know so far, which was something that Battlestar would do. Battlestar would give you a full recap of everything from the
Oh, that's true.
beginning to now to tell their story. Something that used to annoy the crap out of me because I have a pretty good memory. So I didn't need that, but I had to watch it every time. And I swear it got longer and longer. And I was like, come on, salient details. Let's move forward. Um, Another thing I want to bring up is that we were just talking about what happened to the fleet of Dominion ships that, the uh, prophets kind of wave their hand out and they disappear. So there are two different sources, and there is a book out that talks about the fleet that does get displaced, and they end up somewhere where they end up fighting parasitic bug creatures. That's one. But if you are playing the Star Trek Online game, you will know that that fleet actually shows up 34 years later from when they disappeared, where to them there has been no time lapse, and they once again try to take over Deep Space Nine. So if you're interested at all, there's a storyline about it. And you can go play it online if you want.
Fun stuff. Okay, interesting. Um, but to
And no,
answer,
just to answer one quick question in the comments here. No, I did not talk about this show in the cafeteria with my friends when I was in high school because none of my friends watched Star Trek when
uh,
the show was on and I was at that age. So, and then yes, David, finally, did you like the story arc or not?
yes, I did. I guess what I'm getting at is that what we're doing here with this podcast is, at least for me, giving me a chance to just pick apart everything.
Oh yeah,
Generally,
yeah.
like, I didn't watch TNG with like the fine tooth comb. I was just watching episodes. Um, but this, I watched this with fine tooth, so I really dig into things that, like, if I want to critique it, I'm really thinking about it. Why am I critiquing it? What would I do better? What do I want changes here? What don't I like as much? And so, like, there are definitely parts of this 6 parts episode of series that, like, oh man, I wish they'd done more with Jake. I wish that the Kira stuff had been more, like, I wish she had, like, had a full on rebellion going on or something. Like, just
Yeah.
like it just expand it. But they're working with the budget. They have a time limit. I know that they have these things that they're working with writers that, they weren't necessarily there on previous things, so they're having to make storylines from stuff that they maybe not have got a chance to work in their own version. You know
Hmm.
what I'm saying. So there's parts of me that are critiquing it for sure. But yes, do I enjoy it? Heck yeah! It was, again, the space battle was the best space battle in Star Trek so far. I mean,
Yeah.
hands down. Huge fleet. We're fighting. Again, part of me laughs at it with the whole "we broke their line" because that seems a bit outdated terminology. But if anything, I just wish I want, like, that clip that you showed me of the fighting that went on. I want someone to make a full on hour-long documentary about how that fight went. I want to know how that fight went and how the 2-to-1 ratio got worked in their favor somehow, even with the Klingons showing up as reinforcements. Like, when we went into this battle last episode, we were the underdogs and we were in a bad spot. So how did we end up ahead? Um, so
Yeah.
there's always, like, I'm just the guy who loves to, like, perfect everything. That's why I have the hardest time starting stories or writing anything, is because I want the full thing realized before I even sit
Oh
down.
yeah, I
I want
understand.
I want the baby born before I even give it a chance to even grow up. So it's my problem, and when I come to a show that these people actually tried, they actually gave
Yeah.
us something, so I have to
The-
give them props. And yeah, anyway, sorry,
well,
I'm
and
rambling
well,
again.
I was just gonna say the funny thing about the CGI part is it was so expensive back then
Mm,
that this was, with the budgets and all that stuff, it was obviously this is something they really needed to do, and they had to push to get even this much done and perfected and used. And now we could do it. Like the the technology has come so far
yeah,
that seriously, if we wanted to, we could ourselves just sit and use the various programs that are out there right now and do a full-on space battle and make it like 30 minutes long, and it would cost us an afternoon. Like
right,
that would be it. Like that's what's so crazy about it. And I think that's another reason why there's been such a resurgence of popularity for stuff like this, because there are people out there who are doing it. Like the first time that was remastered, that was done by a fan. It was not done by anybody tied to Paramount or anything like that. It was later done by our Paramount team, the same people who had digitized some other work from TNG,
right.
but this was when they were doing all those remasters, of course, and that was also when it was discovered that they could not do a full digitized remaster of uh, Deep Space Nine because of the way so much of it had been filmed.
Mm,
So yeah, I mean, it's just so crazy to me that seriously we could sit and make our own stuff and it would be fine.
right. Yeah. Um, yeah. So yes. Do I like it? Yes. So I want to keep watching? Yes. 100%.
Well, of course you're going to keep watching. We've got more show to do. Well, anything else before we close out this longer episode? Didn't intend for it to be this way, but it kind of is fitting that it would be, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anything else you would like to add or contribute to this breakdown?
So again, I'm curious, what's going to happen next? Are we like, how much are we going back to how things were? Is Cisco just going to be bumbling about doing his job as captain of the station? Is Quark going to start, pulling in hauls again? And is Dax going to get married to Worf and they're going to have babies that sing opera or what? What's going to be new? What's going to be old? We'll find out shortly.
Absolutely. And on that point, the next episode is called You Are Cordially Invited. So, three guesses as to what that one's about. Um, so yes, you can definitely tune in. You can watch that one before our next episode. We'll be back at our normal time, of course, next week. I again apologize for the delay. Obviously, that was my fault because I was pretty much broken down for a day, but I'm back, so don't worry. Other than that, you can find us and follow us anywhere that you happen to do your social medias. You can, of course, listen to us anywhere you happen to listen to podcasts. I do it on Spotify. Also, you can tune in and see our show live every week on YouTube. You can also go back and watch old episodes on YouTube. Please feel free to leave us comments there, of course, and we will try to get to you in due time. But other than that, until next time, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.